The night she paid in nothing but loose coins was the night I realized something unbelievable was hiding inside her silence. People walk into diners carrying hunger, exhaustion, or routine, but she walked in carrying a mystery that made the whole room pause. I watched her fingertips tremble as she counted each coin like they were tiny lifelines, and I kept wondering what kind of storm forces someone to live that carefully. Sometimes you can see a person smile through heartbreak, and it makes you question what kind of weight they're carrying that no one else notices. When her purse fell and that diamond ring glimmered at my feet, everything inside her changed. Her eyes widened like I'd seen something I was never meant to see, and the air between us felt suddenly fragile. She grabbed the ring, whispered a shaky apology, and hurried toward the door as if running from a secret that might break her open. After she hurried out, the diner felt strangely hollow, as if she had taken some unspoken truth with her. I wiped down her table slowly, trying to understand what kind of story hides behind a diamond ring kept in a purse full of coins. People come and go every day, but there was something different in the way she held her breath, like she was carrying a memory that hurt to touch. I kept wondering what she was running from, or maybe what she was trying to hold on to. It's strange how a moment that lasts only seconds can leave a weight behind that lingers long after the door closes. When I bent down to gather the coins she left scattered on the floor, I realized she had overpaid by almost $2. It wasn't much, but for someone counting each coin with trembling hands, it felt like a silent cry. I placed them in an envelope behind the counter, telling myself I'd return them if she ever came back. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I'd ever see her again. People who look like they're carrying the world on their shoulders usually don't return to the same place twice. The diamond ring kept replaying in my mind long after the rush of customers returned. Not because of how expensive it looked, but because of the way she reacted, as if the world might crumble if someone else touched it. Some things are worth more than their shine. Some things hold stories carved so deeply into them that they become reminders of who we used to be, or who we're afraid to become. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this ring meant everything to her. By the time my shift ended, the night had settled into a quiet chill, and the only sound was the humming neon sign outside. I stepped out and looked down the street where she had disappeared, wondering if she'd made it home safely, or if she was still walking with that same frantic breath. I didn't know her. Not really. But something about her silence made it impossible to forget her. I felt the kind of pull you feel when someone's pain mirrors your own, even if you don't understand why yet. Morning always exposes truths the night tries to hide, and as she woke before sunrise, the weight of another day settled on her shoulders like a familiar burden. She moved quietly around her small apartment, careful not to wake her daughter, doing everything with the kind of practiced gentleness only someone who has carried too much learns to master. She folded clothes that had been worn thin, packed lunches with the last of what she had, and pretended not to notice how her hands lingered on the purse where the ring was hidden. It wasn't wealth or luxury she feared losing, but a piece of someone she still loved. Every morning she told herself she would be stronger today, yet the truth was she was surviving on whispers of hope that felt too fragile to name. And still, she kept going. Because stopping simply wasn't an option. By the time the sun began warming the streets, she was already rushing toward her first job, her steps quick and her breath uneven. She had learned long ago that being late meant losing hours she couldn't afford to lose, and losing hours meant the kind of fear that kept her awake at night. She blended in with the morning crowd, yet carried a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that went deeper than a lack of sleep. The ring inside her purse tapped softly against her keys with every step, a constant reminder of everything she was trying to bury beneath routine. Even when she held her head high, there was a heaviness in her eyes that betrayed how hard she was fighting to keep her life from slipping through her fingers. Her morning shift was the kind of job where no one asked how she was doing, because everyone assumed she would say she was fine. She worked through stacks of paperwork with silent precision, masking her fatigue behind practiced politeness. Every few minutes she checked the time, calculating what she needed to finish before running to pick up her daughter and begin the second half of her day. She never complained, but the quiet sighs she let slip revealed the truth she tried so hard to hide. People often imagine strength looks loud and unshakable, but hers was small and steady, the kind that survives even when there is barely anything left to hold on to. When she finally reached the school courtyard, she spotted Mila running toward her with the kind of joy that made every struggle feel momentarily lighter. She crouched down to catch her daughter in a tight embrace, forcing a smile that didn't quite match the fatigue in her bones. She loved moments like these, moments where her child's innocence shielded her from the harsher truths waiting outside the school gates. For a few seconds, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel something softer than work. But even then, her eyes flicked toward her purse, as if checking that the ring was still safe, a reminder that even happiness carried shadows she couldn't escape. By evening, the world had worn her down to a quiet ache, yet she still walked into her second job with the same determined grace she carried everywhere. The small grocery store was nearly empty, the soft hum of refrigerators filling the silence as she stocked shelves with slow, steady movements. She tried to focus on the rhythm of the work, but her mind kept drifting back to the moment the ring slipped into view at the diner. The fear in her chest hadn't left since. She wasn't afraid of losing the ring itself, but of what it represented, the last part of her mother she had left. And as she placed cans in perfect rows, she wondered how long she could keep pretending she was holding up just fine. The next afternoon at the diner, I caught myself glancing at the door more often than I should have, wondering if she might return. I tried to pretend it was routine, just curiosity, but something about the way she held herself that night had settled into my thoughts. When she finally walked in, moving carefully as if she didn't want to be noticed, I felt a quiet pull in my chest. She didn't look up as she took her usual booth, her shoulders tight, her purse held close like it carried more than belongings. I wanted to ask if she was all right, but sometimes the wrong question can make someone retreat even further. So I just watched, not with judgment, but with the quiet understanding of someone who has seen pain tucked behind polite smiles before. While she waited for her order, she traced the edge of her cup with absent fingers, her gaze distant as though she were somewhere far away. I recognized that look, the one people wear when their thoughts are heavier than their words. Every so often she touched her purse, almost unconsciously, as if checking that her secret was still safe. It wasn't the ring itself that haunted her, but the story tied to it, something she wasn't ready for the world to see. And as I watched her sit there in quiet stillness, I felt a strange mix of worry and familiarity rising inside me. I brought her meal over slowly, giving her space while still hoping she might look up. When she finally did, her smile was small but full of unspoken exhaustion. I could tell she was trying to appear calm, to hide whatever storm she was walking through. I wanted to ask if she'd forgotten the envelope of coins I set aside for her, but something in her eyes told me she wasn't ready for questions. So instead, I just said I hoped her day was going okay. She nodded, and for a brief second it felt like she was grateful someone cared enough to ask. As she ate, I noticed how carefully she counted every bite, the way people do when they're stretching more than just money. She took small sips of water, glanced at the clock too often, and shifted in her seat like she carried worries she couldn't put down. She didn't see me watching, but I couldn't help it. Something inside me wanted to reach out. Maybe because I knew what it felt like to hide pain behind silence. I remembered nights when I'd sat exactly like her, pretending everything was fine while falling apart on the inside. Before leaving, she placed her usual small stack of coins on the table with such careful precision, it almost hurt to watch. But then something unexpected happened. She hesitated. Her hand hovered over the coins as if her thoughts were arguing with her heart. When she finally stood, her expression held a mix of fear and gratitude, a quiet plea to remain unseen, yet somehow understood. As she walked out, I felt a shift inside me. I didn't just want to return her extra coins anymore. I wanted to know the story she was carrying, not out of curiosity, but because some people's silence deserves to be heard. That night, long after she tucked her daughter into bed, the apartment felt too quiet to breathe in. She sat alone at the small kitchen table, the only light coming from a dim bulb that flickered every few seconds, making the room feel even emptier. Her purse sat in front of her like a confession waiting to be opened. With trembling hands, she reached inside and pulled out the ring, holding it gently, as though it were made of something more fragile than gold. The moment she touched it, the world around her softened, and the memories she had tried so hard to bury rose to the surface. It wasn't the ring that hurt her. It was the love tied to it. The kind that didn't disappear even after the person did. The memory hit her slowly at first, then all at once. The sound of soft laughter, the warmth of a familiar embrace, and the gentle voice that always knew exactly what to say. She remembered the night her mother gave her the ring, pressing it into her palm with a smile that hid her own fears. She had said it was meant to be a reminder, something to hold on to when life grew heavy. Lena never imagined how soon she'd need it. Losing her mother had cut deeper than she ever admitted, and the ring became the only part of her she could still touch. Selling it had never been an option, not because of its worth, but because it felt like letting go of the last piece of love she had left. The flashback softened into something quieter, a memory of her mother brushing her hair on nights when the world felt too heavy. She remembered leaning into that comfort, feeling safe in ways she hadn't felt since. The ring wasn't just jewelry. It was a promise she had been too afraid to break. A promise to be strong, even when she felt fragile. A promise to love her daughter the way she had been loved. But now, as bills piled higher than hope, the ring felt like both salvation and sorrow. Holding it made her feel close to her mother. Keeping it made her feel like she was failing her child. She closed her eyes and let a slow breath escape, wishing for guidance that would never come again. Her fingers curled around the ring with such tenderness it almost hurt. She wanted to hold on to the past, to cling to the love she'd known, yet every day reminded her that she had a future depending on her. The ring represented everything she was scared to let go of. Everything she wasn't sure she could survive without. And as the silence settled around her, she finally admitted to herself that the pain she carried wasn't only about loss. It was about choosing between memory and survival, and she wasn't sure which choice would break her more. When she finally placed the ring back into her purse, her hands lingered for a moment longer than necessary, as though saying goodbye to something she wasn't ready to part. She stood from the table slowly, feeling the familiar heaviness settle onto her shoulders again. But there was something new beneath it, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A quiet shift, a small spark of courage that came not from letting go, but from understanding why holding on had hurt so much. As she turned off the kitchen light, the ring rested quietly inside her purse, waiting for the moment she would decide what it truly meant for her future. The next morning arrived with the kind of heaviness that made even the air feel harder to breathe. She woke before her alarm, her chest tight and her thoughts tangled with worry about hours being cut, bills waiting, and a future that felt like it was slipping out of her hands. She pushed herself through the routine anyway, telling her body to move even when it begged for rest. By the time she stepped outside, her legs already felt weak, her vision blurring at the edges. She had been pushing too hard for too long, and her body was finally starting to show the wear. Still, she kept walking, telling herself she didn't have the luxury to slow down. Not today. Not ever. At her first job, everything felt heavier than usual. The paperwork blurred in front of her eyes, and her hands trembled each time she tried to steady herself. She hid it behind forced smiles, hoping no one noticed how much effort it took just to stay upright. Hours dragged by like weights pulling her down, and she caught herself gripping the desk to keep from swaying. She knew what exhaustion felt like, but this was different. This was her body begging for a break she couldn't afford to take. With every passing minute, the world seemed to tilt a little more, her breath growing shallow, her pulse quickening in uneven beats. By afternoon, she was rushing across town toward the grocery store for her second shift, her steps uneven but determined. The city moved around her in a blur of noise and color, but her body felt like it was moving through water, every motion slow and heavy. She kept telling herself she could make it, that she had to make it, but the truth was pressing against her ribs like an ache she could no longer ignore. Just as she reached the store entrance, her knees buckled beneath her, and the world tilted sideways. She caught herself against a wall, breath coming in sharp, frantic pulls, yet still she tried to force herself forward, refusing to fall completely. Inside the diner across the street, I noticed her through the window before she even realized anyone was watching. 1 second she was standing, and the next she was barely holding herself upright. I didn't think, I just moved. By the time I reached her, she was gripping the wall like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Her eyes were unfocused, her breath shallow, and for a moment, I saw a kind of vulnerability that hit me harder than I expected. I asked if she needed help, but she shook her head quickly, fear flickering across her expression as if accepting kindness meant admitting defeat. Still, I stayed beside her, close enough to catch her if she fell, even when she tried to convince me she was fine. When she finally managed to stand upright again, she offered a shaky apology, as if her collapse had been an inconvenience instead of a cry for help her body couldn't hold back anymore. She insisted she had to get to work, that she couldn't afford to lose another shift, and there was a desperation in her voice that made my chest tighten. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to keep fighting alone, that someone finally saw how hard she was trying, but the words stayed trapped in my throat, caught between fear of pushing too far and fear of letting her walk away like this. As she took a few slow steps forward, I realized this was more than exhaustion. This was someone reaching her breaking point, while pretending she wasn't even close to it. The next day at the diner, I placed the small envelope of coins on the counter, waiting for her to walk in the way she always did. Quiet, tired, but determined. When the bell over the door finally chimed, she moved more slowly than usual, each step careful, as if her body still remembered how close it had come to giving out. I didn't call her over or rush toward her. I just waited, letting her choose whether to face the moment or slip back into silence. When her eyes landed on the envelope, with her name written neatly on the front, something inside her tightened. She approached with hesitation, like she feared what kindness might ask of her. But kindness doesn't demand. It simply offers, and I hoped she could feel that. She stopped a few feet from the counter, her eyes drifting from the envelope to my face and back again. I could tell she wanted to speak, but the words tangled somewhere inside her, trapped by pride and fear, and all the weight she had carried alone. I gently pushed the envelope toward her, explaining that these were the coins she had overpaid over the past few weeks. Her expression shifted with surprise, confusion, then something heavier, relief mixed with the ache of being seen too clearly. She reached for it slowly, her fingers trembling just a little, as if accepting it meant admitting how much she needed a moment of softness. When she whispered, "Thank you," it sounded like a breath she'd been holding for far too long. She didn't look up right away, but when she did, her eyes carried a story she had never spoken aloud. I told her she didn't owe me anything, not even an explanation, but she shook her head softly. She said she was tired of running from her own truth. And then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she admitted that the ring I saw wasn't from a broken marriage or a mistake she regretted. It belonged to her mother. Her hands tightened around the envelope as she spoke, as if holding onto the past and the present at the same time. I listened without interrupting, knowing some stories aren't meant to be questioned, only witnessed. She told me about the night her mother gave her the ring, how it was supposed to be a reminder that she was stronger than the world believed. But after losing her, the ring became something else, Part comfort, part wound, part anchor, she didn't know how to live without. Every time life got harder, she held on to it like she was holding on to the last piece of someone who once made everything feel safe. And now, every time money slipped through her fingers, she felt the pressure to choose between keeping a memory alive and keeping her life from falling apart. When she finished speaking, she looked down as though waiting for judgment. But all I felt was a deep warmth in my chest. The kind that comes from recognizing someone's pain as a reflection of your own. I told her that holding on to something meaningful isn't weakness, and letting it go doesn't erase the love it came from. She met my eyes slowly, almost cautiously, as if she didn't quite believe she deserved to hear something gentle. In that moment, something subtle shifted between us. A quiet understanding. A small thread of trust forming where there had once been only silence. For the first time, she looked like she wasn't carrying her world alone. The morning she finally made her decision, the world felt strangely calm, as if it understood the weight she was about to lift from her heart. She sat at the same kitchen table where she'd cried, hoped, and held onto the past for far too long. But this time she didn't reach for the ring with trembling hands. She touched it gently, almost gratefully, as though thanking it for everything it had carried for her. She realized she wasn't letting go of her mother. She was letting go of the fear that had kept her life frozen. And for the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to imagine a future shaped not by survival, but by the possibility of something better. At the small jeweler's shop, she hesitated at the door, feeling her heart pound with memories she wasn't sure she was ready to release. But then she thought of her daughter, of the dreams she kept tucked away, of the life she hoped to build. She stepped inside with a courage that came from love rather than fear. When she placed the ring on the counter, a wave of emotion washed over her. Grief, gratitude, and something that felt like peace. Selling it didn't erase her mother. It honored her by choosing to rise even from heartbreak. And as she walked out with the envelope of money pressed to her chest, she felt lighter than she had in years. Weeks passed, and the seeds of her courage began to grow into something real. With the money from the ring, she started the small home business she'd dreamed of, but never believed she deserved. She worked late nights at her kitchen table, not out of survival, but passion. Her apartment slowly filled with signs of new beginnings. Packages ready to ship, handwritten labels, and little drawings her daughter taped to the wall for luck. For the first time, she wasn't just holding her life together. She was building it piece by piece, fueled by a strength she never knew she had. When I walked back into her life months later, it wasn't because I was worried anymore. It was because I wanted to see the woman who had taught me that strength doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes it looks like rebuilding quietly from the inside out. She opened the door with a smile I had never seen on her before, one filled with hope instead of fear. Her home felt alive with possibility, and her daughter's laughter echoed from the next room. Standing there, I realized she hadn't just changed her life. She had changed the way I saw my own. As we sat together in her newly brightened living room, she thanked me, not for saving her, but for seeing her when she felt invisible. I told her the truth. She had saved herself. Sometimes all a person needs is one moment of kindness to remember their own strength. Watching her talk about her dreams with a spark in her eyes, I felt something settle quietly in my chest. Her story wasn't about a ring or a diner or a moment of collapse. It was about how the smallest acts of compassion can change the course of someone's life. And as I stood to leave, she walked me to the door with a smile that said everything without words. She had found her way forward, and I was grateful to have witnessed the journey.